Okay, so we'll start. Hi. This week we're starting a new sefer. We're starting Vayikra, the third book of the Chamish Yankov Torah, and also it is the Shabbat before Purim, so it is called Shabbat Zachor, where we read Parashat Zachor, which is about Amalek. So what I want to do, hopefully, is sort of give a little bit of an introduction and overview of Sefer Vayikra, with focusing on some stuff specifically in this week's parasha, but also, hopefully get a general feel for the book. And at the end, I want to talk just briefly about Parashat Zachor. There's a lot to say, and I just wanted to touch upon it because I didn't want to overlook it, but this the shiur will primarily be about Vayikra and not Zachor. Please excuse me, my throat is bothering me, so I'll be drinking. Okay, so anyone who's learned the Chumash and followed the Parshiot, the many points in their life, knows and feels that this book of Vayikra is a little bit different than the other books, right? First of all, barely has any narrative, right? When you compare it to Bereshit, Shemot, Bamidbar, it's so much narrative and drama. We have, the flood and the Yosef and his brothers and Yetziat Mitzrayim and all the drama in the Midbar, right? You have all these things that go on in the other four books, all this drama and constant tension. And then Vayikra, I don't want to say it's more, it's more bland a little bit. Like there's definitely interesting things, but it's not a narrative. It's not flowing the way the other books do. And interestingly enough, if we look, when we spoke about last week, the last psukim of Sefer Shemot, which talks about God's presence coming in and accepting the Mishkan, we see very similar, almost identical psukim towards the beginning of Bamidbar that talks about a similar thing. So in a way, if you go through the Chumash and you skip and you go from the end of Shemot to Bamidbar, you don't really necessarily feel like you missed much, right? And what I want to argue here is tonight, and what I want to hopefully show is that you did, and that is the case, and that there is definitely a lot to be taken from this book. And even though at first glance, a lot of times it seems like it's things that aren't so relevant to us today, it's korbanot, it's all these tuma and tara that don't necessarily apply to us on the same level today. I really hope, I'm going to first say that yes, it doesn't. There is obviously a lot of things in this book that we will not be practicing today, unfortunately, because we don't have the Mikdash. However, there's still a lot of depth and themes that we could take from this book that do pertain to us in a very, very strong way. And what I want to discuss here is that I think if we look at the book in the broadest sense, it's not only about, we say, it's about the korbanot, but that's not really the case. The book, I think, in a very broad sense, is about kedusha. And what do I mean by that? What's kedusha? So we translate kedusha as holiness, sanctity, something that's sacred. But what essentially do all those words mean, right? What does it mean if someone says, my time is sacred, or this certain place is holy? What is the significance of that, right? So it means that essentially that something is set aside for a specific or designated for a specific purpose. And usually that purpose has to do with a relationship, whether that be you with your relationship with yourself. For example, you have, like you say like, this time in the morning when I'm able to, have my 20 minutes where I could do my tefillah or do my yoga, whatever you do, that's sacred to me, or I can't start my day without it or something like that, right? It's something very important to your relationship with yourself, right? Or we could talk about it in terms of a relationship with another person, right? A partner or a child or any loved one or a friend, right? That a parent, that you have maybe like a certain special place with them that you always, when you want to connect with them, you go out for coffee in this specific coffee shop, or you take a walk in this specific park or whatever it may be, right? These things build the relationship, these specific sacred, holy acts or events. so to speak. And we obviously have that with God to a very extreme level here, so I want to talk about how this book, essentially, in the Sefer Vayikra, is showing us, in a way, it's the ultimate relationship guidebook between us and God. That's what I want to hopefully impart today. And the first thing we notice, right, which is interesting, is that you would assume that after the conclusion of Sefer Shemot, when it talks about the Mishkan and the cloud coming to the Mishkan, and talks about how the cloud's going to guide us in our travels, and the cloud, we're going to, we only could travel when the cloud goes, and when it go, Al Pi Hashem, and God dictating when we'll travel. You would think that the next thing would be that we would start traveling. However, the whole book of Sefer Vayikra, we stay still. And not only do we stay still, where are we when this whole thing happening? Is we are by Har Sinai. There is zero movement. This whole book is happening by Har Sinai. So why is this significant? I think for many reasons. But as we know, one of the most major events in our relationship with God happened at Har Sinai, which is Matan Torah, right? And that was when we built this relationship with God, right? We began essentially this journey with Him, right? And now what we're learning here is that God is not going to be something separate from us anymore, that stays, on the mountain, so to speak. He's going to come down from the mountain, in a way, metaphorically, obviously, and be within our midst, and be in the Mishkan, and be the center of the Machaneh. Now, we have to realize that living with God in our midst is not something to be taken lightly. And it leads to a lot of responsibility and work on our part. And just to give an analogy, it's obviously a very crude analogy in a simple level, but just even if you think to yourself, right, when you have any guest in your house, right, even if it's a casual guest, even if it's a good friend, but even more so if it's, someone you want to impress, your boss comes over, or there's a new person in the neighborhood that you want to invite over and give them a good impression, right? You don't act the same way you act when you're just, amongst your regular, daily life in your home, right? You're going to act differently. You're going to treat the space differently, right? You make sure, you'll clean up the house really nice. You'll make, maybe some nice food for them. You'll dress up nicer, whatever it may be, to impress that guest, or to not even impress that guest, or let's say to respect or to honor that guest, and to act appropriately, right? You're not going to have someone come over and you're going to be, lounging around in your pajamas if it's someone that you, respect and want to show that you care, right? So this, I think, is on a simple level, like I said, a very simple analogy to something that I think, hopefully we could connect to, is what essentially we're faced with in the book of Vayikra, because now the whole dynamic of this relationship between us and God is shifting, and the book of Vayikra is telling us how we have to deal with that. Meaning, what should we do to properly build and engage in that relationship without tampering that relationship, which unfortunately, one of the first things we did, right, was Chet HaEgel that we talked about previously. But here we're trying to, I think what's happening here is the blueprints of how to make this relationship work. And we start the book. I want to talk about, there's going to be different levels of kedusha that we're going to talk about. Different, I don't actually want to say levels, I want to say different facets, because there's not necessarily one is higher or better than the other. There's different facets to this kind of kedusha that builds this relationship. So the first one I want to speak about is, which is what the book starts with, right? Which is our parasha in Vayikra, is the Mishkan and the korbanot within the Mishkan specifically, as well as who and how and all the intricacies of all that, right? So what is that showing, right? It's showing that there's a certain kedushat of a makom. This place has a certain level of holiness and ability to be building the relationship here specifically, the power of this place in building our relationship. And we see that this routine that we perform in the Mishkan is indicating that all our daily rituals, right, in the Mishkan have to be focused and geared towards God. And what's interesting about this is that it starts off, on the one hand, it seems very God-centric, right? God is telling us exactly what to do. This is the person who brings the korban. This is what kind of korban he brings. This is how he has to bring the korban. This is what you do when you bring the korban, right? It has all the intricacies of everything about that. And it doesn't seem necessarily so much like a partnership. However, I want to say that there is a significant amount of human involvement and partnership in these korbanot. And we see there's three general or types of korbanot. There's many, but there's three sort of umbrella types. And I want to discuss how each kind of korban discusses a different interplay in that relationship with us and God. And I want to start off by saying, by the way, this is not going to be a class on. I'm not going to be focusing on the halachot of the korbanot. We're not going into that. This is more thematic. It is very interesting to read all the halachot and see all the things, but this is not what the goal of tonight is. So yeah, just putting it out there. So we have the three basic umbrella types of korbanot are the olah, the shlamim, and the chatat, right? And they differ in a few aspects. They differ in how much is burnt on the mizbeach, right? And who eats them, okay? So each korban has a different specification of what exactly is burnt. And then based on what exactly is burnt, what is left from being burnt, who eats what of the animal, okay? So let's start with the olah. Right, the olah is from the word la'alot, right, to go up, where all of it goes up and it's completely burnt on the mizbeach, on the altar, signifying, that it is all for God, right? That here there doesn't really seem to be so much partnership, right? Yes, the person brings the korban, right, but there's no active participation in the reception of the korban. We then have the shlamim, which can be translated as, shalem, right? Yaakov shalem le'Hashem, right? Whole, complete, in peace, right? Where it's the korban that is shared between it's part of it is burned on the altar, so to speak, shared with God, right? And the kohanim eat it, as well as the Baal HaKorban, the person who brought it. So this one everyone has a part in it. Hence, there's this level of whole completeness, peace, right? That is connected with this shlamim, korban shlamim. Now, before we move on a second to the chatat, I want to point out that these korbanot are korban nedava. Okay, these are voluntary, meaning I, as an individual, can choose if I feel like I want to give this korban, the power to me, I could go and give it. And if I don't, I'm not commanded necessarily to give it. I could choose to give it, right? There's no obligation. And the korban chatat, however, right, is a korban chova. It is meaning it's compulsorily or demanded from God in certain situations, right? When individual, right, when different situations of a person sinning, doing a chet is deemed that that person must give a korban chatat. Now, the korban chatat, interestingly, is obviously burnt, so some goes to God, right? And the kohen is able to eat some of it. However, the person who brings it does not eat it. Okay, so now that was a general overview, and I want to talk about what's the significance of that? What's the significance of the fact that some are voluntary and some aren't, and what are the significance of who eats it? So I want to work backwards to answer that question and start talking about the korban chatat. So the korban chatat is given when one sins, right? It's from the word chet, right? And what exactly does it mean when someone sins, right? What is a chet? A chet essentially is when you veer off the path, right? And we actually see this in Sevet Shoftim. We see this very clearly when it talks about that the people from Binyamin were the best archers and their arrows lo yechatu, right? They wouldn't veer off the path of their target. So here, when someone sins, you're essentially veering off the target, meaning you're overstepping a boundary in your relationship with God, right? And when you cross the line and when you overstep a boundary in any relationship, right? Not only with God, but in any relationship, what essentially is happening when a person, individual, crosses a boundary? It's showing that I lack respect, or I lack care or investment in this relationship, because I'm not really caring or considering or valuing, so to speak, that boundary that you instilled or you're trying to instill, and I'm overstepping it. Okay. And that's not significant to me. So this obviously is showing a complete lack of respect and lack of connection. And when this happens in our relationship with God, we need to rebuild that and repair that. And the way we do that is by bringing this korban chatat, and the kohen can eat it, however, I can't, showing I'm now respecting this boundary between me and God, and I am not overstepping, right? And I am not going to take what is not mine. I am going to know my place and know God's place and respect that. And then when we transfer over to the idea of the shlamim, the theme is a korban nedava, right? It's someone choosing to bring it. And when he brings it, he eats from it, the kohen eats from it, God, so to speak, eats from it, right? It's all inclusive. And this is a complete partnership, a complete sharing with love, right? This takes the relationship from simply, I respect you, right? Which is obviously an important factor in a relationship. You must respect people in any relationship, in any friendship, you must respect the other person, right? Even also, by the way, a big thing I'm going to throw in here is even with your kids, right? Or your students, if you're a teacher, a lot of time in those relationships, the respect is blurred because we feel as the adult, I'm the older one, you must respect me, right? We have that feeling of, how could you disrespect me? But by demanding respect in a certain way, we're essentially taking away the respect from that child, right? Or disrespecting, so to speak, that child and crossing over their boundary. So we have to realize that even in a relationship that we might feel like we're above, we still have to always maintain a certain level of respect, right? Obviously, that doesn't mean permissiveness. There's obviously boundaries, again, that need to be upheld, but there's always a way to do it with respect. I'm not saying it's easy, but as a parent of toddlers, but it is something that needs to be done and should be done to foster a positive relationship. So here with the shlamim, we're going above that respect and we're sharing something together. And this is something that is showing love and connection on a deeper level, right? So this is saying, not only am I respecting our equal places in this relationship and upholding those boundaries, but I want to collaborate with you. I want to connect with you on a deeper level, and I love you, okay? And this also, I think, is important why it's nedava, because when you love someone, you shouldn't have to be forced, right? Oh, it's my birthday, you must get me a present, right? No, if you love someone and it's their birthday or whatever it may be, I just brought that example, but you're going to want to get them a present or, go out and invest time with them and share and do something with them, right? It's not going to be something that you want that needs to be forced if you're in a loving and caring relationship. So hence to here, this korban is a nedava where I want to express my love and connection and build that relationship with God. So I'm going to go bring a korban nedav shlamim. Now we go to the olah, and the olah is also valid. Oh, sorry. Honey, you have to go to bed, sweetie. You have to go. Okay, honey, yes, I'm sorry. Why? Okay.
I just want for a glass of water.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry. The olah is voluntary, but what's different about it is that it all gets burnt. It all gets burnt up, right? Olah la'alot, to go up. It all gets burnt to God, and no one eats it, not the kohen and not the person who brings it. And this is signifying an even deeper level of this relationship, or I don't want to say deeper, but a different aspect of this relationship with God, where I'm not showing my respect or my love, but I'm showing my awe. I'm showing that I am aware of this, that this is a partnership, but it is an unequal partnership, and I accept my place vis-a-vis God, and I know that God is above me. Hence, I am giving him and acknowledging that I'm giving him all of this and not only part of it. There are some things that I do not have the ability to cross that boundary and take and share with God because he still is God, right? And even though there is a partnership, there is a level of awe where I cannot overstep that partnership at certain aspects. So here, I think all this ties in how the Mishkan is the place, right? The Kedushat HaMakom, where we have this ability to use these vehicles, or the korbanot, as vehicles to build and invest in that relationship with God on all those levels, on respect, on love, and on awe, right? And on all those aspects of a deep relationship. Then I want to talk about that we also have the idea in the book, right? This is, I'm getting out of this parasha specifically and going into the book as a whole. And the idea of Kedushat Ha'adam, right? The holiness that is in that of people in person, right? Of a person, and each person in this relationship we speak about, right, is involved in the process, and especially, right, the Kohanim and the Leviim. And we talk about the importance of their role in all of this, but we also talk about the importance of each individual when it says Kedoshim to Li ki kadosh ani, right? Kedoshim to you ki kadosh ani. That not only are the Leviim and the Kohanim Kedoshim because they work in the Mikdash, in the Mishkan, Mikdash, but also all of Am Yisrael is Kadosh because I am Kadosh and you are building this relationship with me. Again, I am in your midst, God is in our midst. We are building this relationship with him. We have certain standards to uphold, right? Some examples of these things are how we conduct ourselves are, for example, the laws of kashrut, right, which we talk about in the book of Vayikra, right? We talk about the laws of kashrut. Because you have this relationship with God, you can't just do whatever you want, even in your physical, even the things that are your physical sustenance. You still have to, filter what you can and cannot eat, and when you can and cannot eat, right? We also see that God grants us the ability to do teshuvah and correct our ways when we slip up in these, in these standards, in these boundaries again that we have to uphold. We then see that there's this idea of kedushat zman, right? Of time. This time holds significance, right? For example, like in a human relationship, right? There are certain times that have certain significance. Birthdays, anniversaries, things like that in our human relationships, where we focus on and we celebrate our relationship and we focus on the other person as well as ourselves. And here with God, we have Muadim and Chagim, right? We have Chagim, which are called Muadim, which literally mean appointments in time, right? So these times, excuse me, these times are literally appointments to take the time and build the connection and the relationship with God, right? We're not going to go into each holiday right now, hopefully at another time, but in general, that's the purpose of the holiday, is to build different aspects of our relationship for those times. We also talk about, interestingly, Shemitah and Yovel, which are a mixture in a way of Kedushat Azman and Kedushat Makom, because we have the special times of the 7th year and the 50th year, right, of Shemitah and Yovel, but we also have it specifically in the Makom, which is Eretz Yisrael. So we add that multifaceted thing, which I think is interesting. Then we have this level of Kedushat Yisrael, which is a little bit connected to Kedushat Ha'adam, but on a different level, where it's this unique bond that God not only has with people in general, but with us, right, with humanity in general, but with us as a nation. And the positive things, right, the good things that could come out if we uphold this bond, and the unfortunate negative things if we do not uphold this bond, right? So basically, to hopefully tie this together for a second, Vayikra seems at first to talk about things that are not necessarily relevant. We can hopefully see, I hope that we saw now that these themes are extremely relevant to our relationship with God. And we need to take these ideas of Kedushat HaMakom, Kedushat Adam, Kedushat Zman, and Kedushat Yisrael, and though they're not on the same level, unfortunately, without the Mikdash and the Mishkan, we can still focus into building those ideas in our relationships with God in our daily life. And today, instead of korbanot, right, we have tefillah, right? And not only do we have tefillah, but we have the tefillah, the ability to build a relationship with God. And even though it feels a little more one-sided than a korban, right, because there's no actual burning in a sense that you feel like God is taking something, that it's just, it's words. However, we could choose how to relate to that. and our mindset. And not everyone, I mean, myself included, not everyone really says the korban. The actual parashat korbanot is in the tefillah of shachrit every day, right? And not everyone necessarily says this, but it's interesting that I heard a nice idea that someone was saying was, I think it was Shani Tarragon, that was saying that even if you don't say this every day, right? You don't say the korbanot. If you feel specifically that you feel connected that if to a certain aspect of the korbanot, maybe just say that one. For example, if something really good happened in your life and you want to say the korban todah, or you feel like you did something that breached your relationship with God and you want to say something about the korban chatat, right? Just an example that you could connect to them and, so to speak, imagine what you would have done in the Mishkan. And I feel like, I don't know where I heard this, and I feel like it was, I don't know, maybe it was like just a nice little story, but it just came to my head now, so I'll repeat it because I think it is a nice message, true or not. But I feel like I heard this story that there was a Rav that would keep a list of like his different transgressions or different things that if the Mikdash was there, he would have given these type of korbanot. And he sort of kept a list of that. Whether it's true or not, it's an interesting idea to keep this consciousness of the ability to know when and how to do those things to build that relationship. So the last thing I want to speak about before we sum up is something that at least myself, we don't consciously, I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but I think a lot of us, we don't necessarily think about this so much, but it was something that was very significant to the korbanot and the Mishkan and the Mikdash was the idea of, not idea, but the actual concept of blood, right? The Mikdash was full of blood and the Mishkan. Every korban, if you read the laws of the korbanot, every korban has some level of zrikat adam or shfichat adam, right? You either pour the blood or sprinkle the blood. Every single korban has some aspect of blood, right? Oh, well, not the mincha because that was not meat from an animal, but any animal korban had an aspect of blood. So why the blood? We don't want to think about it, but why the gore? Why the blood? I mean, we don't really think about it, but if we would walk into the Mikdash, we would be seeing blood, right? It would not be a nice, neat, clean, pretty sight. It would be bloody, literally. Why? What is the significance of that? And it tells us that in a few places, in different ways, but in the same theme, is ki nefesh habasar badam, right? The soul of the animal or the being, human, is in the blood. The soul is in the blood. The life force is in the blood. Now, what is meant by that, right? Simply biologically, right? Well, actually, before I say that, the soul, if you're going to say nefesh, right? Soul is something that we attribute to being completely spiritual, right? So why are we saying that the blood is the soul? Blood is physical, right? It's completely physical. But if we look for a second biologically and just, medically, what is blood, right? You can't live without blood. Blood is the thing that's keeping you alive by the red blood cells giving you oxygen and the white blood cells fighting off any disease or infection that you may have, right? So blood is on the one hand our mortality, but it's also our life force, right? It's also enabling us to keep going, right? Yes, if we lose our blood or our heart stops pumping, we'll die. But it's essentially keeping us going this whole time, giving us that force, giving us that ability to continue. So I think it's sort of, literally puts it in your face when you're giving this korban and you're in the Mikdash and you're looking around at this blood. It's putting you face to face with your mortality and with your place, in respect to God and His immortality, right? And realizing that that this is something that is so important in realizing the balancing on the one hand my mortality, but on my one hand the partnership to God. This is something that we keep coming up to, which is a theme in all of the Torah, I think. And interestingly enough, a little while back when in Shemot we talk about the Dam Habrit, right? That there was a point that Moshe read Sefer Habrit, that he read the covenant with the nation, and then he does korbanot, and he sprinkles on themselves blood, right? And now they have blood of this korban on them, literally face to face with their mortality, but also realizing how deeply connected they are with God in this moment, making this brit, which is very gory on the one hand, but also very significant on the other, that it's really, we don't like to think about these things, right? And a lot of people, especially today, it's very, popular and hip to be vegan and animals that, don't eat any animals. Or even if you do, you're not vegan, you go to the butcher, you get the animal, you don't think about necessarily where is this really coming and how is this getting here, and the ethical, is this really, I actually have someone, a friend of mine who was really in Israel, so I can't really speak for America, but she was really promoting and talking about to anyone who will listen, basically, how she really researched all these farms and saw how horrible these animals were being treated, and that she found other farms where it was more humane and it was healthier for the animal and healthier for you as the human eating the animal, and really understanding where your food comes from. And we are what we eat, and so understanding all that and that cycle and the circle of life, and but really understanding that, because that also, that whole cycle shows us our place in the food chain and in the steppings of humanity, of the world. So I hope that this was oh, sorry, before I sum that up, before I say that, I want to just touch upon Parashat Zachor and Purim for a second. And so in Parashat Zachor, right, we're told to remember and not forget Amalek, and to erase the memory of Amalek. So basically, in very short, because this is a whole other topic in and of itself, but I just want to sort of, I didn't want to not mention it. Amalek is the complete antithesis to all this, right? Amalek negates all connection with God, thus negates any aspect of Kedusha, right? They believe there's no connection with God. Everything is random. I could do whatever I want. Might makes right. There's no higher power. I don't need to listen to God. Not there's no higher power. I don't need to uphold to this higher power. He has no relationship with me. He doesn't care about me. I'm going to do what I want. That's Amalek's view. And we have to, with all this in Sefer Vayikra, we're showing the exact opposite. No, God does care. God wants to build a relationship with us. He's giving us very clear ways in order to do that and foster that relationship. And he wants that relationship as long as we are continuing to uphold it. So I hope that as we continue through the Sefer, through the next few weeks, or more than a few weeks, but through the book, is that we see the relevance here in the book, and it's not only about blood and gore, and it's not only about the korbanot, but it's so much more, and it could be so relevant to us today in terms of building our relationship with God. And hopefully, when Mashiach comes, this will be even more relevant, and we could actually be doing these korbanot and having the special makom to connect to God that unfortunately we don't have. So yeah, I hope we could do that together. Next week is Purim, so there will not be class. So Chag Sameach, enjoy, and I'll see you after that. So thank you.